Sunlight poured into the elegant kitchen of the Vale estate, casting long golden bars across the floor that Ava Calder had polished herself the evening before. She stood barefoot at the sink, one hand absent-mindedly resting on the gentle curve of her pregnant belly, the other cradling a steaming cup of chamomile tea. The faint hum of classical music drifted through the open-concept living space, blending with the comforting scent of maple syrup and cinnamon wafting from the stovetop. She had been awake since dawn. Preparing breakfast had become her morning ritual, a quiet act of love she performed daily for her husband, Ethan Vale. French toast with fresh berries, his favorite. Everything about this morning mimicked the routine of a perfect life, but nothing felt perfect anymore. Ava's eyes drifted to the long driveway, where her husband's black Mercedes pulled in 2 hours earlier than usual. Her brow creased slightly as she watched him step out of the vehicle. His posture was casual, confident. He straightened his slate gray suit jacket and adjusted the lapels with care. His movements were too precise, too smooth, like someone playing a part. From the second-story window, she saw him glance at his reflection in the tinted car window. He combed his fingers through his tousled hair, and something in the way he checked his appearance sent a quiet shiver across her skin. He was not supposed to be home yet. Ava moved away from the window. Her bare feet glided over the wood floors as she returned to the kitchen, trying to calm the unease curling in her chest. The front door opened behind her. "Good morning, sweetheart," Ethan's voice called out as he entered. Ava turned around, her face soft with a practiced smile. Ethan crossed the kitchen quickly, pressed a kiss to her forehead, and wrapped one arm gently around her waist. She inhaled instinctively, expecting the comforting scent of his usual cologne, the cedar and bergamot she had chosen for him on their 3rd anniversary. Instead, she caught something else, a perfume she didn't recognize. Subtle, floral, lingering faintly on the collar of his shirt. Not hers. "You're home early," Ava said, her voice steady though her stomach clenched. Ethan chuckled and waved it off. "One meeting canceled. I figured I'd surprise you." He took his place at the breakfast table, scanning the layout she had lovingly prepared. Crystal glasses gleamed, napkins folded in clean triangles. The toast stacked perfectly on porcelain plates. He smiled, but his eyes flicked briefly to the phone in his hand, which buzzed softly against the table. Ava sat opposite him, watching closely. As they ate, or instead, as she tried to eat, Ethan kept glancing at the device. His thumb hovered over the screen, itching to unlock it. His attention wandered, nodding at her conversation about nursery colors, baby names, and paint samples. She spoke with warmth, describing soft hues and delicate patterns. But Ethan's responses were hollow, mechanical. "Maybe sage green and ivory," she offered. "Neutral, but soothing. What do you think?" "Sounds nice," he replied, not meeting her eyes. She reached for her orange juice, sipping slowly, her gaze locked on him. She had memorized every nuance of this man over 5 years of marriage. The way his voice softened when he was sincere. The way he touched her hand when he felt connected. None of those things were here today. Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time, he picked it up. "Just a client," he muttered quickly, standing. "I've got to take this. I'll be back in a bit." Ava nodded, lips pressed tightly. He was already out the door before she could speak. The echo of his footsteps trailed down the marble-floored hallway and faded into silence. Only the soft ticking of the kitchen clock remained. She stared at his half-eaten toast. The plate looked back at her like a question she wasn't ready to answer. That perfume, that sudden schedule change, the distant gaze, the untapped warmth that once glowed in his every word now dulled to routine. Ava rose and walked through the house slowly, passing framed photographs of their engagement in Amalfi, their honeymoon in Prague, and their groundbreaking ceremony for the home they had built brick by brick. She entered the nursery-to-be, where white walls waited for life and color. Rolls of wallpaper leaned against the wall unopened. A half-assembled crib lay in pieces in the corner. She knelt beside it, one hand resting on her stomach. The baby kicked, as if sensing her unrest. She closed her eyes, fighting the ache rising in her throat. This child, this tiny soul inside her, was the reason she couldn't afford to pretend. She needed answers, not assumptions. Later that day, she entered Ethan's office to organize papers for their accountant. Filing was something she did often without much thought, until her fingers brushed against a folder she hadn't seen before. It was tucked behind investment summaries, unlabeled, thin. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a credit card statement. Not from their shared bank. This one bore Ethan's name. But the account number was unfamiliar. La Maison. The Grand Eden Hotel. Rose and Thorn Boutique. Each line screamed luxury. Each line screamed secrecy. She flipped through the pages, her breath catching with every charge. Weekend stays, jewelry purchases, 2 dinners at restaurants Ethan claimed to hate. One date matched perfectly with the evening. He said he had a board meeting out of town. She had eaten dinner alone that night, stomach queasy from morning sickness. He had texted her good night from Denver. This receipt said he had ordered champagne in a hotel suite in their very own city. Ava stared at the paper, her hand trembling slightly. No confrontation, not yet. She had always believed that love was built on truth, that marriages, once rooted, could weather any storm. But now she stood in the eye of one, and the winds had only begun to blow. She placed the statement back, carefully, exactly where it had been. Then she stepped away. Something in her had changed. The woman who had kissed Ethan goodbye that morning had hoped. The woman standing in his office now understood. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was the beginning of a truth that would no longer allow itself to be ignored. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the Vale estate, bathing the hardwood floors in soft light. But Ava Calder felt none of its warmth. She moved through the kitchen with habitual grace, placing 2 plates on the marble counter. French toast for him. Toast and tea for herself. Her movements were mechanical, rehearsed. It was a morning like any other, except she now carried the weight of a secret he did not know she had uncovered. Ethan strolled in moments later, all polished charm and practiced ease. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You look beautiful," he murmured, reaching for his coffee. Ava smiled, but her eyes remained distant. "Thank you." She watched him out of the corner of her eye as he sat, glanced at his phone, and scrolled quickly. The same routine. His fork hovered above the food, his mind is already elsewhere. She noted the way his gaze darted toward the screen whenever it buzzed. He made excuses about new clients, new projects, tight deadlines. But Ava no longer believed the words. The scent on his collar had not returned, but she remembered it well. Subtle, feminine, floral, foreign. Her own perfume was amber and vanilla. This was not hers, and it had clung to him like a signature she was never meant to notice. As he ate, Ava feigned casual conversation. "I've been thinking about the nursery." Ethan looked up, chewing slowly. "Yeah? Maybe a soft mural on one wall. Something calming." "That sounds nice," he said, his tone neutral. He looked back at his phone again. Ava sipped her tea, hiding her tightening jaw. She had memorized his patterns, the way he avoided eye contact when hiding something. The way he responded was just enough to keep the illusion alive. The man across the table was no longer the man she had married. Or perhaps he never was. Maybe she was only now seeing clearly. That afternoon she waited until he left for the office before entering his study. The door was unlocked. The desk, however, was not. A minor silver key she had found tucked inside a kitchen drawer slid cleanly into the lock. The drawer opened. Inside were documents, business contracts, blueprints, but one folder caught her eye. Thin, black, unlabeled. She pulled it free and opened it. Inside were credit card statements, not from their joint account. This one was in his name alone. Ava had never seen it before. She read through the charges. Hotel suites, high-end boutiques, luxury dinners, all under a different billing address. One name appeared more than once in the receipt descriptions. Sienna. She recognized it instantly. Sienna Langford, the new marketing director. Ethan had mentioned her once, briefly, with no emotion or emphasis. At the time, Ava thought nothing of it. Now the name jumped from the page like an accusation. She closed the folder gently and returned everything to its place. That evening they had dinner together, candlelight, soft music. Ethan played his part perfectly. He laughed, he touched her hand, he complimented her hair. Ava nodded, smiled, even leaned in when he kissed her cheek. But her mind was already moving ahead. She needed more than suspicion, more than a name. She needed evidence, undeniable, concrete. A single conversation with Dr. Celine Park the next morning gave her the key. Celine handed her a small business card. Detective Rains. Quiet, thorough, discreet. Ava thanked her doctor, folded the card into her wallet, and walked out of the office with her back straight and her resolve hardening. Later that day, she dialed the number. Rains speaking. "My name is Ava Calder," she said quietly. "I believe my husband is having an affair. I want proof. Not confrontation, just the truth." Rains responded with calm professionalism. "I'll need a name, dates, anything you can give me. Sienna Langford. My husband's schedule is irregular, but I can send you his usual calendar and business itinerary. He claims he travels often. I suspect most of that is a lie." "Understood. You'll hear from me within 72 hours. Ava hung up the phone and stared out the window. The garden looked the same as it always had, roses in neat rows, hedges trimmed. But she no longer saw beauty in its symmetry. She saw walls, boundaries, illusions of control. That weekend, she met Lila for brunch at their usual cafe. A corner table near the back, sunlight streaming through dusty windows. "You look tired," Lila said, stirring her coffee. "I haven't been sleeping well," Ava admitted. She hesitated, then added, "Ethan's been distant." Lila tilted her head. "Distant how?" "He comes home late. He smells different. He lies and doesn't realize it." "Do you think he's—" "I don't want to think. I want to know." Lila reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're stronger than you think." Ava nodded. "I have to be for the baby." That evening, she went through Ethan's office again. This time, she scanned and photographed everything. Credit card statements, restaurant bills, confirmations. She compiled a folder on her private cloud account and labeled it Mayflower. It was a code word she had once used with her sister in childhood. It meant danger. It meant, don't trust anyone. On Monday, Rains texted, "First update ready. In person?" Ava replied with an address, a quiet bookstore with a small cafe tucked in the back. Rains arrived precisely on time, a tall woman in her 50s with steel-gray eyes and a voice that offered no comfort and no cruelty, just truth. "Your instincts were correct. Here's what we have so far." She passed Ava a small envelope, photographs, hotel timestamps, vehicle records, surveillance images. Ethan and Sienna are walking into buildings together, laughing, kissing in the parking garage. The most damning photo was taken in front of a hotel entrance. Ethan's arm around Sienna, their bodies pressed close. The timestamp matched the same evening Ava had hosted a charity event for the children's hospital. Ethan had claimed a last-minute client dinner. Ava said nothing. Rain sipped her espresso and added, "More will come. I'll continue the surveillance. We're only scratching the surface." Ava nodded. "Thank you." She walked out of the cafe with the envelope pressed tightly in her handbag. That night, she watched Ethan sleep beside her. His face was peaceful, unbothered, as if the lies cost him nothing. She lay awake for hours. By morning, her decision was made. She would not scream. She would not cry. Not yet. But she would prepare. For the day, he finally realized the woman he had betrayed was not the same woman who once forgave his lateness and brushed off his absences. This new Ava would not be fooled again, and soon she would not be silent. Ava stood at the edge of the lake, her hands wrapped tightly around the thick manila envelope that now held the remnants of trust. The wind swept through the trees with a hush that mirrored her silence. She had not yet opened it, but she knew what was inside. The moment Detective Rains handed it to her with a quiet nod and left the cafe without another word, Ava felt it. The truth had finally arrived. She drove home slowly, the envelope resting beside her like a passenger she did not invite, but could no longer ignore. The house greeted her with its usual quiet perfection. The light over the front steps flickered softly in the late afternoon, and the scent of gardenias lingered near the door. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. Inside, she placed the envelope on the dining room table and stared at it. It was not heavy, but it felt like it could crush her if she let it. She made tea instead, boiled water, honey, lemon. Her hands shook slightly as she carried the cup back to the table. Then she sat and opened it. The first image was of Ethan, standing beside a woman at the valet stand of a luxury hotel in Midtown. Sienna. She had golden hair pulled into a sleek ponytail and wore a cream-colored coat cinched tightly at the waist. Ethan's hand rested on the small of her back, a gesture so familiar that Ava could feel the phantom weight of it on her own spine. The timestamp on the photograph placed them at the hotel the same night Ethan had told her he was at a fundraising dinner with the mayor. Ava flipped the page. Another photo, this time in the hotel lobby, his hand still at Sienna's back, her smile wide, her eyes lifted toward him. Another page, the elevator, then the restaurant, then the suite. Ava's chest rose and fell slowly, the breath deliberate. She reached for the next page. Itemized charges, 2 glasses of champagne, a lobster dinner, a room upgrade. Flowers were delivered to the room. There were more. Photos from a weekend in Napa. A handwritten note in Ethan's script was folded in the hotel's notepad. Can't stop thinking about you. And then came the screenshots. Sienna is messaging a friend, gushing about Ethan, about his promises, about his wife being distracted by the pregnancy, about how it would all be theirs soon. Ava closed the folder. She sat for a long time, the cup of tea now cold at her elbow. The silence in the house was no longer comforting. It echoed like an accusation. She moved slowly upstairs and into the nursery. The room was painted soft sage green. The crib still had tags. She hadn't picked out a mobile yet. She had been waiting for Ethan to help choose. That felt laughable now. She sat in the glider and placed her hand on her stomach. Her daughter shifted, a gentle movement like a wave beneath her skin. "You will not be born into lies," she whispered. The next morning, Ava made a list. It began with a call to Adrian Cole, a high-profile attorney who specialized in asset protection and family law. He had represented one of her former colleagues through a complicated divorce that had ended cleanly and in her client's favor. Adrian answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Calder, I was expecting your call." She met him that afternoon in a private conference room at a neutral office complex. Sleek furniture, discreet entrance, no paper trail. Adrian read through the documents quietly. When he finished, he folded his hands. "This is substantial. There's no room for dispute here. Infidelity, misappropriation of marital funds, and documented lies." He tapped the photo of Ethan and Sienna at the vineyard. "Do you want to confront him privately, or leverage this in a more structured setting?" "I want options," Ava said. Adrian nodded. "First step, financial assessment. What are you jointly holding?" "Nearly everything. The house, cars, stocks, trusts. The business is in his name, but the early capital came from my inheritance." "Good, we document that. I'll start the paperwork for a marital asset audit." Quietly, Ava nodded. "Do not confront him until I say so. Let us build the strategy first. The power is in preparation." "Understood." Ava left the office with a thick binder of documentation and a plan. It was the first time in weeks she felt control returning. At home, Ethan greeted her with a kiss and a smile. "You've been busy," he said, noticing the bag in her hand. "Just a few errands, doctor checkup, lunch with Lila." He nodded and turned toward the kitchen. "You'll be proud of me. I cooked your favorite, lemon pasta." She smiled. She could lie too. That night, they ate together in silence, broken only by light conversation. Ava asked about his day. He gave vague answers. She watched the way he avoided her eyes. His phone buzzed once, and he turned it face down. After dinner, he excused himself to make a work call. Ava remained at the table, staring at her untouched wine. Her hand drifted to her belly again. Her daughter shifted gently beneath her skin, and Ava thought about legacy, about how children inherit more than just names. They inherit patterns, cycles, scars. Not this one. Upstairs, she opened her laptop and created a private folder. Project Dawn. Inside, she saved every file Rains had sent, every note from Adrian, a copy of their marriage license, a copy of Ethan's business filings. She scanned her handwritten prenup notes from the early years, the ones that had never been filed. He had convinced her that they weren't necessary because they trusted each other. She backed up the folder twice, once to the cloud, once to a secure drive hidden behind the lining of her old jewelry box. At midnight, she sat in bed beside him as he slept. His chest rose and fell, steady and unbothered. He looked peaceful, innocent. She stared at him for a long moment and tried to find the man she had once loved. The one who held her hand as they painted the guest room, who cried when they first saw their baby on the ultrasound screen. But that man was gone, buried beneath layers of polished lies. She whispered his name once. He stirred, but did not wake. She reached for his phone on the nightstand. It was locked, but he used the same passcode for everything. Their anniversary. She typed it in. Open. Text threads, photos, call logs. Most recently, a message from Sienna. Counting the days. A heart emoji. Ava placed the phone back and turned away. The next morning, she met Rains again. We proceed, Ava said. Full surveillance. Build a timeline. Document everything. Are you sure? I was never surer, Rains nodded. Her voice was low even. He won't see this coming. Good. Because Ava was no longer afraid of the truth, she was ready to use it. Ava sat in the back corner of the quiet co-working space, far from the buzz of conversations and the clatter of coffee cups. Her laptop glowed faintly in the dim lighting, a single document opened before her. It was the outline, the master plan, a living blueprint of everything she had uncovered and everything she intended to do. She titled it Operation Glass, not because it was fragile, but because it was clear. There were now 3 layers to her life. The first was the surface. Morning greetings, shared meals, light kisses. The performance. The second was the investigation. Surveillance updates from Detective Rains, photos stored in encrypted folders, and financial records marked and sorted. Evidence is growing every day. The third was the strategy. Legal preparations with Adrian, asset protection, custody contingencies, public perception planning. Ava knew that when the time came, the court of opinion would matter nearly as much as the court of law. Ethan had built a life with polish and charm. He had curated their social image meticulously. Ava was seen as the elegant wife, the poised future mother, the supportive partner, his pillar, his peace. She would let him believe she still was, for now. Her phone vibrated with a secure message from Rains. Target visited the Langford residence. 2 hours. Returned with overnight bag. Ava replied with a single word. Logged. She minimized the screen and opened her email. A new message waited from her OBGYN, confirming her next appointment. She smiled faintly. It would be a perfect excuse to be unavailable when Ethan next called. Back at the house, Ethan was seated on the couch watching a sports recap. The volume is low, his shirt is untucked, he looked relaxed. Hey you, how was your day? Productive, Ava said with a smile. Just prepping things for the baby, he nodded. She walked over and kissed his forehead. Do you want tea? Sure, thanks. She stepped into the kitchen, her movements fluid, deliberate. She counted her steps, measured the pour. She didn't know why the precision mattered now, but it gave her control. Routine was a lifeline in the chaos. She brought him the cup and settled beside him, curling her legs under her. Have you thought about baby names? She asked, her voice light. He blinked. Not really. I figured we'd wait a bit. We're already in the 3rd trimester. He sipped his tea, eyes flicking back to the screen. You're right. Let's think about it. What about something classic? Like Grace? He smiled. Grace is nice. Ava nodded. It was her grandmother's name. And now it was a test. She checked his reaction. No resistance. But no recognition either. He had never asked why that name mattered. Ava stood. I'm going to bed early. Long day. He didn't question her. That night, she read through the file labeled Sienna Langford Dossier. It was a summary Rains had compiled. Sienna Langford, age 32, divorced, no children. 2 job changes in the last 3 years. Recently hired at Haven Marketing, where Ethan consulted monthly. No known family nearby. Previous employer listed Ethan as a character reference. Ava highlighted that. Ethan never mentioned giving references. The next morning, Ava met Lila again. This time, it was a walk in the sculpture garden outside the city. "You look calm," Lila said. "I feel clear." "That's not the same as calm." "No, but it's better." Lila hesitated. "Are you going to tell him?" "Eventually." What's the trigger? The point where there's nothing left to gain by waiting. And how will you know? Ava looked out over the water sculpture that spun gently in the wind. "Because I will feel nothing when he lies." Later that day, Adrian sent the first batch of financial red flags. Ethan had transferred funds quietly into a private account. Not large sums, but frequent. Small enough to stay under Ava's notice. He had also begun the early stages of moving their joint assets into a holding company. "We strike before the transfer completes," Adrian had said. "Legally, he's exposed, but only for a short window." Ava approved the timeline. 2 more weeks. 2 weeks of silence. 2 weeks of preparation. 2 weeks of playing the perfect wife. In those 2 weeks, she scheduled 3 maternity shoots, all posted on social media, smiling, radiant. She tagged Ethan in each one. He commented, he shared. The world saw a happy couple. She knew better. She also met privately with 2 board members of Ethan's firm, under the guise of a charity proposal. One of them was Mrs. Elaine Rowe, a sharp businesswoman with a low tolerance for impropriety. Ava brought documents, carefully edited. She never accused, she only asked questions. Elaine took the packet with a quiet expression. "You know this will shake things up," she said. "That's not my intention, but it's the outcome." Elaine closed the folder. "Good, it's overdue." The final step came on a quiet Thursday morning. Ava had scheduled a small brunch with Ethan's parents at their estate. She dressed in soft white, her hair was pinned loosely. She arrived early, bought fresh pastries. Her smile was warm. They spoke about the nursery, the name Grace. Ethan's mother teared up when she heard it. Ava excused herself and walked to the garden. Ethan's father followed. She handed him an envelope. "What is this?" "A truth that I believe you deserve before it becomes public." He looked down at it, then back up. "He's your husband, yes, and he's your son, and you are still my family. But I won't let my daughter be born into silence." He took the envelope. When Ethan arrived later that day, there was a shift in the air. His father was quiet. His mother forced a smile. Ava poured the tea. She knew the beginning of the end had arrived. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with a calm unraveling of a lie too tightly wound to survive the truth. And she was ready. The first crack in Ethan's performance came on a rainy Monday. It was subtle, a slightly delayed response to Ava's casual question about a board meeting. A glance held 1 second too long. A pause before a forced smile. To an untrained eye, it would pass unnoticed, but Ava was no longer untrained. She was watching everything, recording mentally, logging inconsistencies. His veneer was beginning to slip, not because she had said anything, but because silence had become her greatest weapon. By midweek, Ethan's patterns shifted. He came home earlier than usual. He brought flowers 2 days in a row. He offered to cook dinner. He kissed her more often. It would have been romantic, if not for the staleness of timing. He knew something had changed, but he didn't yet know what. Ava responded with grace. She accepted the flowers. She praised the food. She laughed gently at his reconnection attempts. Meanwhile, she finalized her financial documentation with Adrian. She signed the petition for temporary asset freezes in case of legal conflict. She met with a real estate agent to value the house discreetly. She also moved 2 family heirlooms from the bedroom to a private storage unit. Jewelry from her mother, letters from her grandmother, the silver locket she planned to pass on to her daughter. "You are not a victim," she reminded herself as she locked the storage unit door. "You are a strategist." That evening, Ethan invited her to sit by the fire with him. He poured wine, rubbed her shoulders, spoke about how excited he was for the baby, how he had been thinking of taking time off to be more present. Ava nodded, her face soft. "That sounds wonderful." Inside, she marked another line in her internal ledger. He was overcompensating, trying to reset a narrative that had already escaped him, but he didn't know how far ahead she was. The next morning, the final piece arrived. Detective Raines called her at 7 a.m. "We have it," he said. Ava sat upright in bed. Tell me. Audio recording. He was with Langford last night. The conversation included mentions of hiding assets and a plan to move forward once the baby is born. Ava's breath slowed. Send it. 5 minutes later, she plugged in her headphones and listened. The voice was unmistakable. Ethan's tone was low, careful. It's just a matter of time. She's distracted by the pregnancy. I've got everything lined up. Once things settle, I'll leave. She'll be fine. She's got her charities and her friends.
Sienna responded with a laugh. And your daughter? I'll be generous. She'll be taken care of. Ava sat in the silence that followed the playback. She was no longer angry. She was resolved. She called Adrian. It's time. He responded without hesitation. I'll file the papers this afternoon. Press embargo is ready. You will control the narrative. Ava moved through the day with a calm that startled even her. She laid out her daughter's clothes in the nursery, folded blankets, reorganized the bookshelves. She prepared dinner as usual. Ethan was late. When he arrived, he looked flustered. Sorry, traffic, long meeting. Ava kissed his cheek. No worries, let's eat. Over dinner, he made conversation, talked about travel plans, mentioned a villa in Tuscany that woman had offered. Ava listened, eyes focused, her replies pleasant. After dinner, as they cleared plates, she asked softly, "Can we talk in the living room?" Of course. They sat across from each other. The fire crackled gently. Rain tapped at the windows. Ava folded her hands in her lap. Do you love her? Ethan froze. What? Sienna. His face twitched. Only slightly. What are you talking about? Ava tilted her head. You can lie, Ethan, or you can stop. I'll give you one chance to choose. He stared at her. I don't know what, she interrupted. I have the photos, the receipts, the hotel logs, the messages, the recordings. His face lost color. She held up her hand. This isn't a confrontation. This is a declaration. I know. I've known for a while, and now you do too. Ethan sank back into the couch, speechless. I wanted to believe the man I married was better. I gave you space, trust, loyalty, and you gave me plans to abandon your child before she is even born. His eyes widened. That's not true. I never said. She repeated his voice word for word. She's distracted with the pregnancy. Once things settle, I'll leave. He closed his eyes. You don't understand. No, you don't. She stood slowly. The papers will be filed tomorrow. You will receive them through your attorney. Ethan rose too, panic starting to lace his features. Ava, wait. We can talk about this. This doesn't have to. It does. Her voice was steady, cold. You made your choices. This is the result. And I will raise our daughter without the shadow of your lies. I will not let her learn love through betrayal. She turned away and began walking upstairs. Ethan followed. Ava, please, don't do this. Don't throw away. She stopped on the landing. You threw it away. He stood there, helpless. She stared down at him. Do not try to make this mine. You had every chance to choose integrity. You chose convenience. She continued up the stairs and closed the bedroom door. He didn't knock. The next day, headlines broke quietly. Ava's legal team issued a controlled statement citing irreconcilable betrayal and steps toward a peaceful resolution. The public responded with respect, sympathy, support. Ethan's company shares dipped slightly. Speculation began. Sienna Langford's name trended online for 36 hours before being buried by larger news. Ava did not engage. She began prenatal yoga, rescheduled her nursery appointments, took walks in the morning sun, and every night she wrote a letter to her daughter, a journal of truths, of strength, of the decisions that would one day shape the woman she would become. The last entry she wrote that week was simple. You were born from clarity, not fear, from love that refused to bend to false comfort. I chose you over everything, and that is how we begin. The morning began with a silence so pristine it bordered on sacred. Not the uneasy silence that follows a fight or the tense hush of something unsaid, but a silence of sovereignty, of a woman who had regained full command of her world. Ava rose earlier than usual, her body feeling lighter, not physically but emotionally, as if every betrayal she had carried had fallen off her shoulders overnight.
The sunlight filtered in gently through the white linen drapes, casting soft gold against the cream walls of her bedroom, and as she placed her hand over her belly, she whispered a quiet promise to her daughter that no one would ever lie to them again. In the kitchen, she moved slowly, methodically, as if time belonged solely to her now. The clink of the spoon against the ceramic bowl echoed like a bell in a cathedral. Her phone buzzed once on the counter. She checked the notification. It was from Adrian. The subject line was simple: "Final filed." The message is short. The documents had been accepted. The emergency protection orders were active. Custody rights, financial freezes, court dates. It was all in motion. Ava stared at the screen, unmoved. There was no glee, no vengeance, only relief. The kind of relief that comes when the threat has passed and the rebuilding can begin. She didn't open the attachments right away. Instead, she poured herself a glass of water and walked barefoot onto the back patio. The garden looked the same, but she didn't. Something inside her had been rewired. She sat and opened her laptop, starting a new document she titled, "What I Will Not Carry." It wasn't a letter or a list meant to be shared. It was a contract with herself. In bold at the top, she typed, "I will not carry the weight of another's cowardice. I will not carry shame disguised as compromise. I will not carry the noise of someone else's chaos. I will not carry his legacy of betrayal. I will carry her. I will carry strength. I will carry grace. I will carry forward." The words felt like bricks being laid into the foundation of a future no longer dependent on Ethan's permission. A few hours later, the doorbell rang. She was surprised, but not startled. She checked the security feed. It was him, alone. No suit, no bouquet, no lawyer, just Ethan. She opened the door and met him with a stare that said he was a visitor in a place he used to live. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice quieter than she remembered. "We already have," she replied, but stepped aside. She had no fear of him now. He stepped into the house like a ghost, noticing the subtle absences. His watch was no longer on the mantel, his books gone from the shelves, his presence slowly being erased. "I read everything," he said, sitting on the edge of the couch. "You've planned this for weeks?" Ava nodded. "I protected myself for weeks. That's different." Ethan exhaled and ran his hand through his hair. "You were always smarter than I gave you credit for." Ava tilted her head. "You mean I was always smarter than you hoped I would be?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a single folded document. It was the early settlement she hadn't expected him to agree to without a fight. "I'm not going to drag this through court," he said. "I won't fight you on custody. I won't touch the trust. He hesitated. "I just want the door open, just a little. For when she's born." Ava read the document. It was clean, signed, witnessed, legal. "You should have led with this," she said, laying it on the table. He looked up at her. "I was stupid. I thought I could have it both ways. But you've made your point." She crossed her arms. "No, Ethan, life made my point. You just refused to listen until it became court-mandated." He nodded, accepting the truth. "May I at least say goodbye when she's born?" She studied him, not with bitterness, but with detachment. "You can request supervised visitation. That's all I'm willing to offer." He nodded again. There was no fight left in him. After he left, Ava sat in the quiet again, this time sensing how different it felt. The house wasn't haunted anymore. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't a reminder of a failed performance. It was hers. That evening, she drove to a small cemetery on the edge of town, where her mother had been buried years earlier. She brought white lilies and a small note she tucked beneath the vase. Kneeling on the grass, she whispered, "You always said love was patient, but you also said love was honest. I'm finally learning what both mean." She sat with her mother until the sky turned lavender and the air cooled. On her way home, she rolled the windows down. The wind tangled her hair, but she didn't fix it. She welcomed it. It reminded her that she was moving forward, freely. She didn't recheck her phone that night. She didn't need to. She knew who she was. She knew who she would be. And more importantly, she knew what kind of mother she would become. Ava had always been the woman behind the glass walls. Perfect, composed, untouched by chaos. But now, the walls had spoken, and she had answered. Not with rage, not with bitterness, but with purpose. With fire disguised as poise. with freedom wrapped in discipline. And from that day forward, Ava's silence no longer concealed anything. It declared everything. The days that followed Ethan's departure were not defined by chaos or collapse, but by the steady construction of something long overdue, Ava's own life. It was as if everything she had endured had burned away the excess, the illusions, and what remained was steel. Quiet, polished, unbending steel. She did not cry when the official notice of hearing came through. She did not flinch when her name trended briefly online alongside whispers of scandal. She did not call friends for validation or consolation. She simply moved forward, piece by piece, designing a life that no longer revolved around performing safety for someone who had always been a danger in disguise. Adrian visited her one afternoon with his assistant, bringing a series of sealed folders and legal forms. They sat at the sunlit table in her dining room, a space once used for Ethan's client dinners and curated brunches. Now it held contracts, account statements, custody outlines, and timelines. Ava listened carefully to each clause, asked sharp questions, made red marks, and never once looked uncertain. "I want language that guarantees decision-making authority without compromise," she told Adrian. "No vague phrasing, no loopholes." Adrian nodded. "I've prepared 3 backup strategies in case his counsel tries to challenge parental authority clauses. But honestly, with the evidence we've secured and the early settlement signed, I doubt they'll risk it." Ava looked him dead in the eye. "Doubt isn't a plan. Include the backup language anyway." That same evening, Ava received a message request on social media from an account she didn't recognize. The profile picture was blank. The name read simply, M. Langford. Against her usual instincts, she opened it. The message was short. "You don't know me, but I know my brother. What you did took courage. I'm sorry he turned out the way he did. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." Ava stared at the message for a long time, then she archived it. She wasn't ready to extend forgiveness across bloodlines. Not yet. The next morning, she began recording her own video journal entries, not for sharing, not for fame, but for her daughter. She sat in the nursery each morning, hair tied back, makeup free, voice soft but steady. "This morning I woke up feeling a little tired," she began one entry, "but then I remembered that every day we wake up without having to pretend is a day worth being thankful for. You will know this freedom early. You will know the sound of a home where the silence is peaceful, not poisoned." She continued these entries each day, storing them on an encrypted drive, knowing that one day they would be a map for her daughter, a record of what strength looked like when it had every reason to shatter. At her weekly checkup, the doctor commented on her blood pressure and glowing complexion. "You're in excellent shape," the physician said, glancing at the ultrasound. "And she's thriving too. Strong heartbeat, perfect growth curve." Ava smiled. "She's a fighter." The doctor nodded, sensing something unspoken. "And so is her mother." The first press outlet broke the story 5 days before the court date. Despite Adrian's media embargoes, someone leaked it. Probably someone on Ethan's team, hoping to control the narrative. The headlines tried to be neutral, but they couldn't help but skew. Power couple unravels weeks before birth of first child. Tech exec facing custody challenge amid infidelity allegations. Ava didn't read the articles. She simply posted a single line on her public platform. "Some stories are not meant to be controlled, only lived. I choose truth. I choose protection. I choose her." The post went viral. Support poured in. Private messages arrived by the hundreds, not just from friends or acquaintances, but from strangers, other women, former partners, mothers, daughters. Some shared their own betrayals, others simply offered hope. One message read, "Thank you for showing us that walking away can be an act of love." The night before court, Ava stood in the doorway of the nursery, staring at the moonlight filtering across the soft pink rug. The crib sat assembled, untouched, waiting. The walls were painted a calming sage. On one side hung a framed quote that read, "She who walks with purpose walks with power." Ava reached out and gently touched the frame. Then she whispered, "You were never going to be born into a lie. I won't let that happen. No matter what happens tomorrow, we're already free." The court was quiet, surprisingly so. Ethan arrived looking hollow,
dressed in gray instead of his usual black. His lawyer did most of the talking. Adrian stood tall and calm beside Ava. She never looked at Ethan, not even once. The judge reviewed the documentation, nodded through the evidence, and praised the maturity with which Ava had conducted herself throughout. When the final gavel came down, Ava felt no rush of adrenaline, no rush of tears, only finality, a door closing with no need to be locked. That night, Ava returned home to a clean house and a full moon. She didn't turn on any lights. She walked barefoot into the living room, sat on the floor, and rested her hand on her stomach. "It's done," she whispered. "We begin now." Everything that came before was just the storm before the clearing. She picked up her journal and wrote a single entry. "You will never have to unlearn what safety feels like. You will never have to question your mother's silence, because I promise you, every silence I kept was for you. But now I speak. Now we rise." Ava no longer waited for the walls to echo back her pain. They had been repainted, reclaimed, repurposed. She didn't need them to speak anymore. She had found her voice, and soon, so would her daughter. The following weeks unfolded, not with a dramatic flair, but with a soft rhythm that was almost melodic in its consistency. Ava found peace in repetition. She rose at 6, brewed her tea, stretched beside the nursery window, and spoke softly to her daughter with stories of her dreams and promises she would now keep. The rest of the world, with its headlines and whispers, continued without her attention. Ethan had entirely retreated into silence, his name vanishing from both inbox and memory. Ava no longer waited for apologies that would never arrive or resolutions that required his participation. Instead, she focused on her own completion. There was a calm in the mundane that no longer felt like settling, but instead like healing. Each drawer she reorganized, each piece of mail she shredded, each call she returned was a stitch in the fabric of a new life she was weaving with precision and care. Adrian dropped by every Thursday now, usually in the afternoons, bringing updates with a relaxed smile and a confidence in Ava's strength that never felt patronizing. "You know," he said one day while placing a new batch of documents on the dining table, "most people in your position would have crumbled. You've rewritten what survival looks like." Ava didn't respond with pride or deflection. She simply said, "I was never surviving. I was waiting. Now I'm building." The nursery had become more than just a room for the baby. It had become Ava's sanctuary. Each wall held intention. The books were carefully chosen not only for their language but for their messages. Stories of girls who spoke up, mothers who protected, adventures that didn't end with rescue but with awakening. The dresser drawers held tiny onesies arranged by color and season, each fold pressed with maternal precision. Ava spent hours in that room, not because she feared what lay ahead, but because she was anchoring herself to what was coming. The future no longer arrived with dread, but with invitation. Some nights she would sit in the glider, hand on her belly, imagining the first cry, the first breath, the weight of her daughter in her arms. She didn't fantasize about perfection. She prepared for the truth, for the nights without sleep, for the unexpected questions, for the moments she would not have all the answers. And she embraced that readiness as her new form of strength. One Friday morning, Ava received a call from her old mentor, Helena, a retired nonprofit executive who had once encouraged Ava to run her own foundation. They hadn't spoken since Ava's wedding. "I've been following the headlines," Helena said gently, "and I just want you to know, you remind me why I believed in women leading in the first place." Ava's throat tightened, but she didn't cry. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Helena's voice lowered. "There's a project I'm working on. Domestic Resilience Initiative. I'd like your voice on it. When you're ready," Ava promised to consider it. And for the first time in months, she felt her former self not as a ghost or echo, but as a re-emerging ally, waiting to join the woman she was becoming. Her baby shower arrived without Ethan, without his name on the invitations, without his family involved, and it was perfect. Her friends gathered in the backyard under soft drapes and fairy lights, laughing with joy untainted by drama. They gave gifts with handwritten notes full of encouragement, and each hug felt like a shield wrapped around her.
During a toast, her best friend Cassie raised a glass and said, "To Ava, who taught us that the strongest walls are built not from stone, but from truth. And to the baby girl who chose the fiercest mother." There were tears then, but they were not born from pain. They came from recognition that Ava had crossed a threshold, that she was no longer just reclaiming, she was arriving. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the stars had filled the sky, Ava stood in the kitchen alone, rinsing glasses and humming softly. Her phone buzzed with a message from a new number. For a moment she hesitated, then opened it. It was a single sentence. "Thank you for not letting my mistakes shape her future." It was unsigned, but she knew it was Ethan. She did not reply. She deleted the message, because closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes it is the silence that follows the final word. As her due date approached, Ava began preparing her hospital bag. She packed not only the essentials but symbols of intention: a printed copy of her birth plan, a framed photo of her mother, a journal with letters to her unborn daughter, and a playlist she had made of songs that reminded her of resilience and grace. She didn't know precisely when the labor would start, but she wasn't afraid. Every breath she took from that point forward was a contract with the life she had chosen. Not the one she had been sold, or the one she had been betrayed into, but the one she had claimed with both hands and a spine of iron. Ava no longer questioned whether she was enough. She was not enough. She was overflowing. And when the first contraction finally came in the soft pre-dawn hours, she closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered to her daughter, "Let's meet the world together." The moment Ava stepped into the hospital, the world outside dissolved. The automatic doors slid shut behind her like a seal, marking the boundary between her old life and the one about to begin. The halls were quiet, painted in soft tones, the fluorescent lights oddly gentle above. Her overnight bag was slung over her shoulder, her fingers resting protectively over her belly, as the contractions came steadily now, deeper and more insistent. A nurse greeted her with calm professionalism and a warm smile, checking her in and guiding her to a private birthing suite. Everything was prepared. Ava had done her work. She had read every book, questioned every doctor, rehearsed every outcome. What she could not rehearse, however, was the fierce stillness inside her, the sensation of a storm held in perfect balance, waiting to break with beauty rather than destruction. The hours passed in waves. Labor was not just a physical trial, but a quiet war of intention. Ava breathed through each contraction with focused silence. Cassie was by her side, the only person she had invited into this sacred space, gently wiping her forehead and offering ice chips with a reverence that made Ava feel held without being dependent. When the pain reached its peak and Ava's body trembled from exhaustion, the doctor calmly guided her forward. "You're ready," he said. "Let's meet her." With every ounce of strength, every prayer she had whispered into the walls of the nursery, every moment of betrayal she had transmuted into power, Ava bore down and brought her daughter into the world. The silence that followed the cry was the loudest thing Ava had ever heard. It was not silence of emptiness. It was the silence of arrival, of completion, of sacred transformation. The doctor placed the baby on her chest, and Ava looked into a pair of dark eyes that blinked slowly up at her, as if they had always known each other. She felt a tether snap into place, not of dependence, but of shared destiny. This was not a beginning for her daughter alone. It was a beginning for them both. "Welcome," Ava whispered, her voice raw and soaked in tears. "You are safe. You are wanted. You are home." The next few hours blurred into warmth and softness. Nurses moved in and out, checking vitals, adjusting monitors, offering quiet encouragement. Cassie stayed until Ava insisted she go home to rest. Ava was left in the dim hospital room with her daughter wrapped in a blanket beside her, the faint hum of machines fading into the background. She did not sleep. She simply watched. Every tiny movement, every sigh, every stretch of those impossibly small fingers felt like scripture being written across her heart. For the first time in what felt like years,
Ava allowed herself to rest into stillness. Not because there was no more danger, but because she had finally become the storm and the shelter. Messages poured in throughout the next day, but Ava opened only a few. Her lawyer sent formal congratulations and a reminder about the upcoming custody review. Helena sent flowers and a card that read, "Now begins the greatest revolution of all, motherhood." Most of the messages were from women, friends and strangers alike, who had followed her story and now celebrated this arrival as if it were a collective triumph. Ava felt no need to perform for them, but she appreciated their presence. Quietly, she posted a photo of her daughter's tiny hand gripping her finger. No caption, none needed. 3 days later, she returned home. The drive from the hospital felt surreal. The city was the same, cars and buildings and pedestrians moving about as if nothing monumental had happened. But for Ava, everything had shifted. The house greeted her not with echoes, but with softness. The nursery awaited with gentle colors and quiet books. Ava carried her daughter inside, whispering, "This is your kingdom. We built it together." She placed her in the crib for the first time and sat beside her, listening to the quiet coos, the flutter of eyelids, the faint sounds of life unburdened by pretense. Adrian came by a week later with final paperwork and updates on the trust funds, the legal transitions, and a few discreet media follow-ups. "You don't have to answer any questions," he said. "You've already spoken more with your actions than any interview could." Ava nodded. "Let them write whatever they want. I've written my own ending." He smiled and pointed to the baby. "More like a beginning." Before he left, he handed Ava a letter. "This came through my office. It's from Ethan. Do you want me to discard it?" Ava stared at the envelope. It was handwritten, unsealed. "No," she said, taking it. "I'll decide what to do with it." She waited until the house was quiet, until her daughter had fallen asleep in the carrier strapped to her chest, before opening the letter. It was brief, apologetic, regretful. Ethan wrote of cowardice, of his own blindness, of a realization that came too late. He asked nothing, offered no justification, only an acknowledgement of the woman Ava had proven herself to be. At the end, he wrote, "I hope she inherits your spine and your silence. It speaks louder than anything I've ever said." Ava folded the letter and placed it in a box labeled, "For her, not now." She had no interest in reliving his version of events, but one day when her daughter asked questions, Ava would provide both truth and context, not to shield her, but to prepare her. Over the following months, Ava adjusted to the rhythm of motherhood, not with a desperate scramble, but with quiet mastery. She learned her daughter's signals, the tired sighs, the hunger cries, the joyful squeals. She learned to sleep in pieces and to love in full. She sang lullabies not from a songbook, but from her own memory. She recorded more video messages. She took long walks with a stroller and longer showers during nap time. She watched the world change inside 4 walls that no longer felt confining but expansive. And on one particular afternoon, as the sun cut golden ribbons across the hardwood floor, Ava sat with her daughter in her arms, reading a story aloud. Midway through, she paused, looked down at the sleepy eyes blinking up at her, and said, "Everything before you was survival. Everything after is creation." In that single moment, Ava knew without doubt that she had become not just a mother, but the author of a legacy, one not built on perfection or reputation, but on intention. She had walked through betrayal and emerged sovereign. She had given birth not only to a child, but to herself. And the woman holding that child now was not someone who had merely endured. She was someone who had arrived, whole and unbroken, carrying both the weight of the past and the promise of what was yet to come. Ava woke to the hush of morning, the kind of silence that was no longer haunted, but sacred. Her daughter lay beside her in the co-sleeper. Small hands curled like petals, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, a quiet miracle that made Ava smile without effort. The sun had not yet spilled across the sky, and the world felt paused in a moment just for them. These early hours had become Ava's ritual of reflection, a space between sleep and responsibility, where her thoughts could breathe. She no longer measured time by what she had lost or what had been taken. Now she measured it by smiles, tiny giggles, milestones met not with fanfare but with warmth. Later that morning, while her daughter napped, Ava opened her laptop for the first time in weeks to something other than lullabies or baby sleep sound playlists. Helena had followed up on the initiative she mentioned before Ava gave birth. It was a social impact project supporting women rebuilding their lives after domestic betrayal, professional sabotage, or emotional devastation. The message read, "You were the case study. Now you could be the architect." Ava stared at those words, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, she wasn't sure if she was ready to re-enter that world. Not the boardroom, not the battlefield of polished statements and strategic positioning, but the work of change. Then, her daughter stirred softly beside her, and Ava typed a reply. "I'm in, but I will do it my way." She spent the next 2 weeks outlining a framework for the initiative. She called it Project Reclaim. Its core pillars were story, structure, and sovereignty. Story because women needed to understand their experiences were not shameful, they were powerful. Structure because too many had survived chaos only to fall into another due to a lack of support. And sovereignty because proper recovery came not just from escape, but from ownership. Ava proposed digital tools for journaling, legal resource directories, and a mentorship network where women who had walked through the fire could hold the hands of those still learning how to stand. Helena responded within the hour, stunned and impressed. "This isn't just a project," she wrote, "it's a movement." Meanwhile, Ava's days remained rooted in the beautiful mess of motherhood. Sleep came in fragments. Meals were often one-handed, eaten while rocking a restless baby. Her body was still healing, and there were moments of sharp pain, emotional echoes, and uncertainty. But there was also laughter, unexpected bursts of joy as her daughter smiled in her sleep or kicked her legs during bath time. There was the first gurgled syllable that resembled a word, the first time her daughter grasped Ava's finger and didn't let go. Ava began re-recording voice memos, whispering thoughts into her phone during midnight feedings. "One day," she said, "you'll read about your beginnings. But more than that, I hope you feel it, in the way our home breathes, in the way your mother never folded." Ethan's presence remained distant, but not entirely gone. He sent a gift through a third party, a gold locket engraved with their daughter's initials. Ava opened it slowly, then closed it just as quietly. She did not return it, but she did not use it either. She placed it in the same box as the letter, for someday, not today. His silence was no longer a threat or a manipulation. It was simply space. And Ava had filled that space with meaning of her own making. One Sunday afternoon, Cassie came over bearing takeout and that familiar wide grin. They sat on the floor of the living room, the baby nestled between them, gurgling at the ceiling fan. "You know," Cassie said between bites of spring rolls, "you could have disappeared after all of this. No one would have blamed you. But you didn't. You became louder, not in volume but in presence." Ava looked at her daughter, then back at Cassie. "I couldn't disappear. Not when she was just arriving." They clinked their juice glasses in quiet solidarity. Project Reclaim launched in the spring with a soft rollout online and a private webinar. Ava chose not to appear in the promotional materials. She wanted the message to outshine the messenger. But those in the inner circle knew. Survivors wrote in from every region, thanking the anonymous founder for making them feel seen. The platform grew slowly, authentically, without marketing gimmicks or branding tricks. It grew because truth resonates. Ava checked the dashboards each night after bedtime, reading the testimonials with tears that came not from pain, but from pride. Every story shared was a bridge built. Every resource downloaded was a thread stitched back into someone's unraveling. The seasons shifted. Ava's daughter grew from infant to explorer. Crawling turned to wobbly steps, babbling to insistent demands. Motherhood no longer felt like something new. It had become embedded, instinctual. Ava no longer counted days since the divorce. She no longer flinched when someone mentioned Ethan's name. She could attend events, hold conversations, and even review past documents without feeling hijacked by memory.
Healing had not erased the past, it had integrated it. On the anniversary of her daughter's birth, Ava hosted a small gathering in the garden. There were balloons, soft music, and a table filled with fresh flowers and baby-friendly food. Her daughter clapped along to the music, enchanted by bubbles floating in the sunlight. Helena gave a toast. "To Ava," she said, raising her glass, "who taught us that building a home is not about walls or titles, but about the courage to start over, and the grace to make that choice again and again." That evening, as the last guests drifted away and the sky turned lavender, Ava sat alone by the window with her daughter asleep in her lap. She looked out over the city. The same skyline that once felt like a wall now felt like a horizon. She opened her journal and wrote one final entry in the series she had begun nearly 2 years earlier. "This is the shape of strength. It is not loud. It does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers at 2 a.m. Sometimes it builds a nursery. Sometimes it rebuilds an entire life. But it always, always rises." Ava closed the journal, kissed her daughter's forehead, and whispered, "The world is waiting. Let's keep writing." Ava sat at her desk as dusk fell, the soft amber glow of the nursery lamp bathing the room in warmth. Her daughter slept in the next room, her rhythmic breathing monitored by a baby monitor that hummed with static reassurance. The house was still. Outside, the city carried on. Its traffic pulsed, its lights blinked like silent beacons, but inside this home Ava had built, a quiet clarity settled over her like a familiar blanket. Tonight felt different, not heavy, not urgent, but necessary. Ava reached for the letterhead she had saved since her pregnancy, the one she always intended to use for this singular purpose. She uncapped the pen, took a slow breath, and began to write a letter addressed to her daughter. One she would not give her now, but someday when the time was right. "My beloved, by the time you read this, you will be old enough to wonder about me, about us, about the decisions that shaped your life before you could shape it yourself. I imagine your eyes scanning these lines with curiosity, maybe confusion, maybe even defiance. I welcome all of it, because this letter is not about telling you what to think. It is about telling you the truth. There was a time, not long ago, when I did not recognize my own voice, when I lived quietly in a life that did not honor me, when love was something I begged for instead of something I lived inside. You were not yet born, but you were already growing inside me, and it was your heartbeat that reminded me mine was worth listening to. When I discovered the betrayal that shattered what I thought was my home, I did not leave because I was angry. I left because I finally understood what love was supposed to feel like, and it was nothing like that. You were the beginning of my return. You were the reason I took each terrifying step toward freedom, even when it meant facing judgment, silence, and an uncertain future. People told me to forgive, to settle, to compromise, to think of you, but I was thinking of you every second. I wanted you to be raised in a space where love was not a transaction or a performance, but a truth, and the only way to give that to you was to live it first. So I learned. I studied my own patterns. I redefined my worth. I built a world where our laughter echoed louder than any apology ever could. I built Project Reclaim because I realized that too many women have been told their strength is a liability. I wanted you to grow up in a world where strength is a seed, not a threat. There were hard days, nights when I cried while holding you, moments when I doubted myself, when exhaustion folded over me like fog. But I never regretted it, not once. Not when we left, not when I raised you alone, not when I turned down offers that looked good on paper but compromised our peace. You were never a detour. You were the map. I chose your name with intention. It means light. And that is what you are. In every room you enter, in every corner you brighten with your laughter, I see that light. And I promise you, I will never dim it. Not for tradition, not for reputation, not for anyone who cannot see the brilliance of your spirit. You may one day ask about your father, about what happened. You deserve to know. He was a man I once believed in, and in some ways, I'm grateful to him. Not because he stayed, but because his absence made room for your arrival and my awakening. He loved you in his own way, I believe, But love without responsibility is not love. It is longing, and longing cannot raise a child. It cannot shape a future. If you ever meet him or hear his version of things, I want you to remember this. Stories have many sides, but yours is always worth telling. Do not let someone's silence or absence rewrite your narrative. You are not the product of a failed marriage. You are the result of a brave decision. And that decision was mine. This home we built together was made from the softest fabrics and the most brutal truths. It was designed not to protect you from pain, but to prepare you to face it with grace. You will grow, you will question me. You may even resent me. That is okay. I did not raise you to worship me. I raised you to become yourself, fully, fiercely, without apology. There will be people who try to define you by their limitations. Those who see your strength as stubbornness, who mistakes your softness for weakness. Let them. Their vision is not your responsibility. Your light is not a performance. It is your birthright. I hope you make mistakes, glorious, spectacular ones, because that means you are living boldly. I hope you fall in love with people who see you, not just your beauty, but your truth. And I hope you leave those who don't, without guilt, without explanation, without delay. I hope you forgive yourself more quickly than I did. I hope you speak kindly to your reflection. I hope you become a mother one day, if that's what you want, and if you do, I hope you understand that it will not complete you, but it will expand you in ways you never imagined. This letter is not a guide, it is a mirror, one you can hold up to remember where you came from, what you survived, and how you rose. There are 1,000 other things I want to tell you, but none matter more than this. I am proud of you. Not for what you do, not for how you succeed, but for who you are and who you continue becoming. Love is not something we find, it is something we become. And you, my darling, are love in its purest form. Always. Mama Ava laid the pen down and sat still for a long moment. The letter shimmered under the light, each word etched with care. She folded it gently, slipped it into an envelope, and tucked it into the journal she had kept since her daughter's birth. A journal filled with observations, memories, fragments of growth, both hers and her daughter's. The letter would wait for the right day, for the moment when her daughter would need to hear not just the story, but the intention behind it. As the night deepened, Ava walked to her daughter's room, placed a soft kiss on her temple, and whispered the final line of the letter again into the quiet. Not because the child needed to hear it now, but because Ava needed to feel its truth in her bones. You are love in its purest form. The morning air was soft with mist as Ava stepped into the community center, her heels echoing faintly across the polished floor. In her arms, she carried a leather-bound folder filled with proposals, models, letters of support, and data sets. But more than that, she carried purpose. Project Reclaim had grown beyond even her quiet hopes. What began as a digital sanctuary had blossomed into an ecosystem of support. There were now 6 pilot cities, dozens of partner shelters, and over 300 women who had transitioned from survivors to mentors. Ava had been asked to present the next phase to the advisory board of a major foundation. They wanted to fund expansion. She wanted something more: sustainability. She walked into the conference room with quiet confidence, her presentation poised, her voice steady. She was no longer speaking as someone who had once lost everything. She was speaking as someone who had chosen to rebuild and had invited others to do the same. When the final slide clicked into place, Ava looked out over the boardroom table, her eyes calm. This project is not about rescue, she said. It's about recognition. Women do not need saving. They need space. And when you give them that, they change everything, first for themselves and then for everyone else. The applause was genuine. The decision was unanimous. By the end of the week, Ava received the grant, and it came not just funding, but freedom. She would be able to scale without compromise. She would not have to soften her message to secure support. She would not have to polish away the parts of the truth that made others uncomfortable. She could continue to speak plainly, to build boldly, to honor the lived experiences of every woman whose story had once been reduced to whispers. That evening back home, she poured a glass of tea and sat down to update the mission statement. Her daughter played at her feet, stacking wooden blocks, humming to herself. Ava glanced down and smiled. "Do you want to help me write something important?" The toddler looked up and grinned, babbling a joyful response. Ava opened her laptop and added a final line to the new Project Reclaim manifesto. It read, "We do not rebuild to erase what was broken. We rebuild because the truth deserves a home." As the seasons changed once again, Ava's life settled into a rhythm that felt like a legacy. Her daughter grew taller, bolder, with questions that arrived like raindrops, soft and persistent. "Where did I come from?" she asked one afternoon, lying beside Ava in the grass, watching the sky. "From the strongest part of me," Ava said, "from the part I hadn't discovered yet." They watched the clouds move. "And my name?" the girl asked. "Why that one?" Ava took a deep breath. "Because your name means light. And because when everything went dark, you were the only thing I could still see clearly." The child nodded solemnly, as if filing that away for later. The questions grew as she did. Not all could be answered in a single sentence. Some required stories. Ava gave them gently, never all at once, never like a sermon. She told her daughter about love and choices, about voices and silence, about the courage it took to leave and the grace it took to stay gone. She never vilified Ethan, but she never hid the truth. She trusted her daughter to hold nuance. It was the only way to teach her strength without armor. On her daughter's 5th birthday, Ava gifted her the box, not to open yet, but to know it existed. "This is a part of your story," she said. "When you're ready, you can open it. Not before." The girl nodded, sensing the gravity of the moment. "I'll be ready when I'm big," she said. Ava smiled. "You're already bigger than you know." That year, Project Reclaim received national recognition. Ava was invited to speak at conferences, to write essays, and to sit on panels with politicians and policymakers. She accepted only some. She chose carefully. Her voice was no longer for hire. It was for a purpose. In one particularly poignant keynote, she closed with a quote that had lived on her mirror for years. "I used to think survival was the end goal. Now I know it is only the beginning." The world took notice, not because Ava asked it to, but because it couldn't look away. The quiet ferocity of her leadership, the clarity of her conviction, and the transparent tenderness with which she spoke about motherhood and identity made her different. Not a brand, a blueprint. She was not flawless, she was faithful. To her principles, to her voice, to the women she had vowed to serve. As her daughter entered school, Ava restructured her work hours. She attended every recital, every parent-teacher conference, every scraped knee meltdown. She learned the names of her daughter's friends, packed lunches with handwritten notes, and built a home life that never felt like a side project. She showed up, fully, not as a martyr, as a mother, as herself. On the 10th anniversary of Project Reclaim, Ava was asked to write a book, a memoir of sorts, but also a handbook. She hesitated, not because she was unwilling to share, but because she wanted to make sure the story served a purpose greater than catharsis. Eventually, she began. Each chapter braided personal truth with collective wisdom. The final chapter was titled The Legacy of Her Name. It ended not with a conclusion, but with a letter, the same one she had written years ago. She published it in full. Readers wept. Survivors stood taller. Daughters everywhere began to ask different questions, and mothers began to answer them with new courage. The book became a quiet success. Not a bestseller in the commercial sense, but something better. A seed passed from hand to hand, from heart to heart. Therapists recommended it. Shelters stocked it. Book clubs dissected it. College students quoted it. And in Ava's own home, one child grew up knowing that her name was not just a word, it was a promise. Years later, Ava stood at a small graduation ceremony. Her daughter was 16, delivering the student address. She spoke not of grades or accolades, but of resilience, of what it means to begin again, of what she had learned from the quiet strength of her mother. "She never asked me to be perfect," the girl said. "She asked me to be real. And because of her, I never once doubted that my story mattered." The crowd rose to its feet in applause, but Ava did not clap. She pressed her hands over her heart and let the moment settle there. That night, her daughter curled up beside her.
tired from the celebration but still buzzing with energy.
"Do you think I'll make something that lasts?" she asked. Ava wrapped an arm around her. "You already have. You've made a life that tells the truth. Everything else will follow." Outside, the stars pressed against the sky like tiny signatures. Inside, a woman who had once been broken and a girl who had never doubted her place in the world sat side by side. Not as a symbol, not as an ending, but as a legacy still unfolding. One name, one truth, one generation at a time.